Last month, Allied troops celebrated wildly on Victory in Europe Day. For them, the end of the World War was finally in sight, yet the mood of some in American high command was more anxious. For the logisticians and administrators, the easy part was now over, and it was now time for the hard part to begin. It was time to begin the process of moving millions of soldiers across the world on the tightest of schedules to fight the Japanese. U.S. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall calls this the greatest administrative and logistical problem in the history of the world. How will the U.S. cope? I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II in real-time special episode about American reorganization and redeployment plans after the Allied victory in Europe. This video focuses on the redeployment plans themselves and won't really touch much on the civilian developments. If you want to know more about what was happening on the home front, check out the regular series. Anyhow, with the death of President Franklin Roosevelt and the surrender of Germany, the U.S. is facing a period of real uncertainty about how best to move forward with the war. New President Harry Truman has been briefed on the development of the atomic bomb on multiple occasions by Secretary of War Henry Stimson. However, the bomb still remains some months away from completion, still with all the possibilities of delays and complications, and for a payoff which still sounds quite fanciful. So preparations for the invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, proceed according to plan. The Joint Chiefs of Staff work in conjunction with General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz during the long planning phase of Downfall. And on May the 5th, the War Department is ready to make some things public. These include a reduction in the size of the Army from 8.3 million to just under 7 million. This number, it is believed, will give the U.S. the flexibility and strength to occupy part of Germany while also carrying out the invasion of Japan in a reasonable time frame and with minimal losses, although losses are still expected to be heavy. The plans, though, stress the need for men and material currently in Europe to be transferred to the Pacific. The first phase of Downfall, Operation Olympic, is actually to be carried out by units already in the Pacific Theater, backed by additional units from the States. Phase 2, Coronet, the invasion of Honshu, will require several 100,000 reinforcements from Europe to go off on schedule, and many more such redeployed divisions once a beachhead has been established. Time is of the essence. The War Department has been working on a system that would allow the Army to demobilize many of the veterans while also facilitating the transfer of other units to the Pacific. Marshall, at the forefront of the planning, desperately wants to avoid the long wait that demobilizing soldiers had to endure after the Great War and get as many veterans home to their loved ones as quickly as possible. He is well aware that the surrender of Germany will trigger a clamor for demobilization at home as politicians, business leaders, and ordinary civilians start to see the war as all but finished and demand a return to civilian life. He fears the longer it takes to defeat Japan, the more the military will increasingly become vilified by press and public as austere killjoys who won't let the country get back to peace. This is even more the case after Roosevelt's death. His presence might have been able to hold off congressional interference in the war a bit longer. Since July 1943, the War Department's Special Planning Division has been working on these issues. They have devised a system which sacrifices some efficiency in favor of fairness. See, polls show that soldiers agree with Marshall that discharging men by division, which was done post-Great War, is unfair, since each division is made up of veterans and newcomers, and instead they favor a system using each individual soldier's service record in deciding whom to discharge. The result is the adjusted service rating, which assigns a number of points to every individual soldier. Redeployment Day, or R-Day, was scheduled for May the 12th, which turns out to be 4 days after VE Day. So how exactly does the adjusted service rating actually work? Well, each month of service earns the soldier a point. If that month of service is served overseas, they earn an additional point. Each medal for valor, merit, or wounds taken is worth 5 points apiece. Combat service is calculated by the Battle Star system. A soldier is assigned a star for each campaign they participate in, each worth 5 points. Fathers with dependent children waiting on their return also receive 12 points per child for up to 3 children. A score of 85 or higher is required for discharge, and less than 85 means reassignment to a unit in one of several categories. So, 85 points may seem like a tall order, but the point totals really add up. Imagine a soldier who was drafted in late 1942 or early 1943, spending 6 months training in the U.S. for 6 points, and the next 2 years abroad for another 48 points. Throw in a couple battle stars, a kid back at home waiting for you, and a medal or two, and you're on the boat home, baby. At least in theory. Some restrictions still apply, and the Army reserves the right to retain soldiers with a military occupational specialty, regardless of their point totals. These skills are typically related to radio, radar, and other signals units. Dwight Eisenhower also insists soldiers who have served in 2 theaters, for example, North Africa and Europe, are exempt from redeployment to the Pacific, regardless of their point totals. As I mentioned before, units are to be placed in different categories depending on their future function. It's an administrative nightmare, so the Army tries to simplify the process as much as possible. Category 1 units are soldiers with mid-range scores, and these are to remain in Europe for occupation duty. Category 2 units are slated for eventual transport to the Pacific Theater, and are soldiers with the lowest overall scores. These units are to be directly redeployed to the Pacific or be brought back to the States en route to be trained in skills that would come in handy against the Japanese. They will be brought to staging positions towards the end of 1945 in time for the invasion of the Kanto Plain scheduled for early 1946. But wait, hold on. Doesn't that sound a little counterintuitive? Sending mostly green troops to fight in the invasion of Japan and keeping combat veterans in occupied Europe. Well, yeah, you could say that, but this is further demonstration of the Army's commitment to fairness. Units in Category 3 are to be retrained and reorganized, more so than units of other categories, before being reassigned to Category 1 or 2. And finally, Category 4 units are the largest proportion of men meeting or exceeding that golden 85-point total, for whom the war supposedly is over. Despite the intention of these plans, some soldiers eligible for discharge do still find themselves in redeployment units destined for combat duty by necessity or by human error. Now, in what may come as a surprise to any veterans amongst you, it soon becomes clear that Army bureaucracy may have bitten off more than it can chew, and made an already confusing situation far, far worse. After our day, the Army begins its reorganization efforts. Divisions, with their new rosters of soldiers, begin moving and shipping out according to their categories. The 2nd Division, for example, finds themselves shipped back to the U.S. very briskly en route to the Pacific Reserve as part of Category 2. More transport capacity than expected is found to be available, allowing them to be brought back ahead of schedule. So all's well, and things are proceeding according to plan. Except not quite. See, after the division arrives home, a further 2 battle stars are awarded, bringing 2,700 men of the 2nd Division into eligibility for discharge. No problem, though. Surely some replacements can be found from the draft, right? Well, those guys are all spoken for, unfortunately, and most of them are headed to join MacArthur's forces in the Pacific for Operation Olympic. The only option now, then, is to bring in replacement troops from other Category 1 and 2 units still in Europe. But even that is unfeasible, though, since the unexpected extra transport capacity that brought these units back to the U.S. ahead of time is now fully in use. The 2nd Division is going to have to wait for some time for reinforcements. The late awarding of battle stars also renders a further 14,000 troops in Europe eligible for discharge, causing even more headaches. Administrative difficulties and errors also mean that even the underlying principles of fairness are starting to fall short of their goals. For instance, the 63rd and 65th Divisions carry a very mixed roster in terms of point totals, yet they are to be deactivated. Meanwhile, the 45th Division has 11,000 soldiers and 600 officers available for discharge, yet finds itself earmarked for the invasion of Japan. If the administrative failings alone aren't enough, the practical elements behind the operation are also falling short. By early July, estimates for moving troops out of Europe that month are revised down from 236,000 to 119,000, barely half the Army's original number. The increasingly frustrated Colonel D.E. Farr of the Troop Control Section at the Pentagon remarks at this point that, if these are the facts, I think we'd better call off the war in the Pacific. Further headaches are also caused as equipment, supplies, and materials hastily packed and shipped to the Pacific arrive damaged or even ruined in transit. This not only forces yet more replacement equipment into the already overstretched shipping network, but also impacts the ability of the engineer units already in the Pacific to build the required facilities to accommodate the incoming number of soldiers. Even prepping MacArthur's existing forces for the invasion is difficult enough, thanks in part to congressional interference. See, back in April, the U.S. passed an amendment to the Selective Service Act, which forbids the use of 18-year-olds in combat until they have received at least 6 months of training. For Army planners, this amendment could not come at a worse time, as it will now take even longer for discharged veterans to be replaced by fresh troops. All of this means that by the end of July 1945, the U.S. Armed Forces face a situation far removed from what they expected. The redeployment efforts continue, but continue to lag behind, and it's unclear whether the Army has any hope of meeting its targets before operations are scheduled to begin. Further frustration is also likely on the home front as politicians and civilians grow increasingly weary of the war and just want to see it over. At this time, the Americans could really use some kind of, maybe a MacGuffin, something to sidestep all of these issues. That's not very likely now, is it? Well, deployment is a hassle for all armies, of course. If you'd like to see how the Soviets handled deployments for their gigantic offensive in January this year, you can click here for a special we made on that. And join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com to get more and more of these specials and this specials. All specials for the Army is what keeps our war machine deployed. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.